At my housewarming party, my sister stood tall and said, "My lawyer has already drawn up the papers. From this moment, this house is mine." She turned to the crowd and declared, "I am no longer welcome here." My husband simply took a sip and began to count 3, 2, 1. Then silence took over. The first thing people notice about my sister Vanessa is her perfect posture. Even as children, she stood ramrod straight, shoulders back, chin lifted. Our mother called it ballerina discipline. I called it what it was, a physical manifestation of her superiority complex. Growing up in suburban Philadelphia as the daughters of Richard and Ellen Spencer meant living up to expectations. Dad worked as chief of surgery at Jefferson Hospital, while Mom ran her interior design firm with ruthless efficiency. Excellence wasn't requested, it was mandated. Vanessa thrived in this environment. I merely survived. My sister graduated top of her class, became the youngest partner at her law firm by 30, married well, and maintained a social media presence that belonged in a lifestyle magazine. Meanwhile, I dropped out of college twice, worked a series of uninspiring jobs, and dated men my parents deemed unambitious until I met Marcus. Marcus Reeves entered my life like a hurricane, unexpected, powerful, and impossible to ignore. We met at a charity auction where I was working as a server and he was a guest. When I spilled champagne on his custom suit, I expected anger. Instead, he laughed, asked for my number, and left a tip that exceeded my weekly salary. On our first date, I learned Marcus had built his fortune from nothing. The son of a janitor and night shift nurse from Newark, he'd put himself through school, started a tech company, sold it for millions, and now ran a venture capital firm specializing in underrepresented founders. My parents were reluctantly impressed. They couldn't dismiss his bank account, even if they found his background lacking pedigree. Vanessa, however, despised him on sight. "He's nouveau riche," she whispered loudly at our engagement party. "All that money, zero class. He probably eats with the wrong fork." I pretended not to hear her, focusing instead on Marcus's hand in mine. The 6-carat diamond on my finger caught the light, sending prismatic rainbows dancing across the ceiling of my parents' formal dining room. Marcus and I married at San Francisco City Hall with just 2 witnesses, his childhood best friend Devin and my college roommate Lucia. We didn't tell my family until after, which created the first major rift between me and my parents. Vanessa called it typically selfish behavior and refused to acknowledge our marriage for months. When Marcus and I decided to move back east to be closer to family, we began house hunting in Chestnut Hill, Philadelphia's old money neighborhood where both my parents and Vanessa owned homes. The real estate market was brutal, with properties selling within hours of listing, often well above asking price. After 6 months of disappointment, we found it, a historic Georgian colonial on 2 acres with a guest house, pool, and gardens designed by a prominent landscape architect. The guest house, a charming miniature version of the main residence, stood near the back of the property, surrounded by mature oak trees. The house had been owned by the Whitmore family for generations, and Eleanor Whitmore, the elderly widow selling it, was particular about the buyers. She wanted someone who would preserve the home's character, not a developer planning to subdivide the lot. The asking price was steep, $4.2 million, but fair for the area and property. We offered asking, no contingencies, with a letter explaining our plans to restore rather than renovate. 2 days later, our realtor called. Mrs. Whitmore had accepted our offer over several higher bids because she felt right about us. Vanessa called within an hour of the news breaking in our family group chat. "You're buying the Whitmore estate?" Her voice dripped with disbelief. "That house has been on my radar for years. Eleanor and I are in the same garden club. I've been waiting for her to sell." "You never mentioned wanting it," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I shouldn't have to announce my intentions to avoid being undermined by my own sister," she snapped. "Why would you even want to live in Chestnut Hill? Your whole bohemian aesthetic doesn't fit here." The conversation devolved from there. By the time we hung up, Vanessa had accused me of intentionally sabotaging her, and I had reminded her that the world didn't revolve around her outspoken desires. Marcus found me crying afterward, and his face hardened when I explained. "She'll get over it," he said, but something in his expression made me wonder if he actually believed that. The closing process went smoothly until 3 days before signing, when our attorney called in a panic. Apparently, Eleanor Whitmore's nephew had emerged with an alleged verbal agreement that he had right of first refusal on the property. He was threatening to sue to block the sale. Marcus handled it with the calm efficiency that made him successful in business. Within 24 hours, the nephew withdrew his claim after a private meeting with Marcus's legal team. When I asked what happened, Marcus simply said, "I offered him a generous consultation fee to respect his aunt's wishes." We closed on the property a week later. Eleanor handed me the original keys, heavy brass things that looked like museum pieces, and whispered, "This house has sheltered 6 generations of my family through wars, depressions, and personal tragedies. Its walls hold secrets and strength. It will protect you too, if you honor it." The statement seemed melodramatic at the time, but I would remember it later. Renovations took 6 months. We preserved the historical elements while updating plumbing, electrical, and adding modern conveniences. Marcus surprised me with a studio space in what had been the conservatory, walls of windows overlooking the gardens, custom storage for my art supplies, and a skylight that bathed the room in natural light. "This is your home too," he said when I protested the expense. "You should have a space that's entirely yours." Throughout the renovation process, Vanessa made her disapproval known. She drove by regularly, sometimes stopping to point out issues to the contractors. She sent articles about historical preservation with passive-aggressive notes like, "Since you're new to this kind of property." She even brought up the house at my parents' anniversary dinner, suggesting we were butchering a landmark. Marcus handled her better than I did. Where I would get defensive, he remained unflappably polite. "Thanks for your concern, Vanessa," he'd say with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. I knew that smile. It was the same one he wore in business negotiations when someone underestimated him. The morning of our housewarming party arrived with perfect early summer weather, 78 degrees, clear blue skies, just enough breeze to make the garden flowers dance. The catering team arrived at noon, the bar service at 1, and the string quartet at 3. By 4 o'clock, everything was ready: food stations throughout the first floor, bars on the terrace and in the library, flowers in every room. I wore a simple white sundress with the sapphire earrings Marcus had given me for our first anniversary. He looked devastatingly handsome in linen pants and a light blue button-down that matched his eyes. When he pulled me close for a kiss in our newly finished foyer, I felt a surge of contentment so powerful it nearly brought tears to my eyes. "Ready to show off our home, Mrs. Reeves?" he murmured against my hair. "More than ready, Mr. Reeves," I replied, squeezing his hand. Guests began arriving at 5. Friends from both our lives mingled with neighbors, business associates, and, reluctantly on my part, family. My parents arrived precisely on time, my mother immediately cataloging everything with her designer's eye while my father made a beeline for the bar. Vanessa and her husband Bradley arrived 45 minutes late, an entrance time for maximum attention. She wore a designer dress in a shade of crimson that seemed deliberately chosen to stand out among the summer pastels of other guests. Bradley looked uncomfortable in his navy suit, his eyes darting to his watch every few minutes. I greeted them with forced warmth. "I'm so glad you could make it. Can I get you drinks?" "Bradley can't stay," Vanessa replied without returning my hug. "Board meeting emergency." "I'll have a gin and tonic, Hendrix, not whatever well brand you're serving." "We're actually pouring Monkey 47, Marcus said smoothly, materializing beside me. "Small batch, from Germany's Black Forest. You'll like it, Vanessa, it's exclusive enough to impress your friends." The subtle dig went over her head as she accepted the drink from a passing server. "The place looks interesting. I see you went with more modern touches than I would have advised." "Eleanor Whitmore loves what we've done," I said, unable to resist. "She's coming by tomorrow for a private tour." Vanessa's smile tightened. "How nice. I should check on Mom and Dad." As she walked away, Marcus whispered, "1 gin and tonic in, and she's already in rare form. This should be an entertaining evening." If only I had known just how entertaining it would become. The party progressed beautifully through its first 2 hours. The food was exceptional, the music provided perfect ambience without overwhelming conversation, and even my mother seemed grudgingly impressed with our home and hosting. Marcus circulated effortlessly, connecting people with shared interests, while I showed small groups through the garden and main rooms. Around 7:30, I noticed Vanessa having an intense conversation with Bradley, who had apparently returned. They stood in a corner of the library, their body language tense. When Bradley spotted me looking, he abruptly walked away, leaving Vanessa alone with her third, or possibly fourth, drink. I decided to check on her, against my better judgment. "Everything okay with Bradley?" I asked, approaching cautiously. She swirled the ice in her glass. "Work crisis. He's handling it." "Do you need anything? Food? Water?" "What I need," she said with sudden vehemence, "is for people to stop taking what's rightfully mine." Before I could respond to this bizarre statement, Marcus announced that dinner would be served on the terrace. The guests began moving outside, where long tables had been set up beneath market lights strung through the trees. The setting sun cast everything in a golden glow, and several people gasped audibly at the beauty of the scene. Marcus and I had planned to say a few words of welcome once everyone was seated. We stood together at the head table, waiting for the guests to settle. I was just reaching for my water glass to tap for attention when Vanessa stepped into the center of the terrace. "Before we begin this lovely dinner," she said loudly, her voice carrying across the suddenly quieting crowd, "I have an announcement to make." Marcus's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently in warning. Every instinct told me something terrible was about to happen. Vanessa stood tall, shoulders back, chin lifted, perfect posture as always. For those who don't know me, I'm Vanessa Harrington, sister of our hostess. She gestured vaguely in my direction without looking at me. "And I've been keeping a secret that can't wait any longer." The guests shifted uncomfortably. My father half rose from his seat before my mother pulled him back down, whispering urgently in his ear. "My lawyer has already drawn up the papers," Vanessa continued, her voice growing more confident with each word. "From this moment, this house is mine." A collective gasp rippled through the gathering. My vision tunneled, darkness creeping in at the edges as I struggled to process her words. Vanessa turned to face the crowd directly. "Furthermore, I'm declaring that my sister is no longer welcome here. This property was promised to me by Eleanor Whitmore years ago, and I have documentation to prove it." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Every eye moved between Vanessa and me, waiting for my response. But it was Marcus who moved first. Calmly, deliberately, he lifted his wine glass to his lips and took a slow sip. Then, with a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, he began to count down. 3. Vanessa's triumphant expression faltered slightly. 2. Phones began to emerge from pockets and purses as guests sensed impending drama. 1. The silence that took over was different now, expectant, charged with potential energy. Then Eleanor Whitmore herself appeared at the entrance to the terrace, assisted by her nurse and looking every bit of her 87 years but with eyes sharp as ever. "I believe," she said in a voice that carried surprisingly well for her age, "that someone is misrepresenting my intentions regarding my family home." The next 10 minutes unfolded like a scene from a courtroom drama. Eleanor Whitmore, having been invited to surprise us by joining for dessert, had arrived early enough to hear Vanessa's proclamation. With devastating precision, she dismantled my sister's claims. "I have never promised this property to Vanessa Harrington, verbally or otherwise," she stated firmly. "In fact, when she approached me 3 years ago about purchasing it, I declined her offer outright." Vanessa's face drained of color. "Eleanor, you told me—" "I told you," Eleanor interrupted, "that I would consider all serious offers when I decided to sell. And I did. Your offer came with conditions I found distasteful, primarily your plan to subdivide the grounds for additional development." Gasps rippled through the crowd again. In our neighborhood, such a plan would be considered sacrilege. When Amelia and Marcus presented their offer, they showed genuine appreciation for the property's history and integrity. Their vision aligned with mine. The choice was simple. Eleanor's gaze softened as she looked at me. And I haven't regretted it for a moment. Vanessa stood frozen, her perfect posture finally failing as her shoulders slumped forward. "You don't understand," she began, but Eleanor held up a hand. "I understand perfectly. And so does everyone else now." She turned to address the gathered guests. "Please continue enjoying this lovely evening in this beautiful home that belongs, legally and rightfully, to Amelia and Marcus Reeves." With that, she allowed her nurse to escort her to a seat at our table, effectively ending Vanessa's moment in the spotlight. The silence that had taken over broke into murmurs, then conversations, then a deliberate return to celebration as our guests collectively decided to move past the awkwardness. The string quartet, showing remarkable presence of mind, began playing again. Vanessa remained standing alone in the center of the terrace, abandoned by the attention she had so desperately sought. When she finally moved, it was to lurch toward the exit rather than return to her seat. I started to follow her, some sisterly instinct not yet extinguished despite everything, but Marcus gently caught my arm. "Let her go," he said quietly. "This is her mess to deal with, not yours. But, trust me," he said, his blue eyes serious. "There's more to this than you know. Stay here with our guests." Something in his tone made me obey, though I watched with a knot in my stomach as Vanessa disappeared into the house. Later, after most guests had departed with extra slices of cake and effusive compliments on a memorable evening, I found Marcus in his study with our attorney, David Moskowitz, and Eleanor Whitmore. They fell silent when I entered, exchanging glances that sent a chill down my spine. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between them. "What did you mean when you said there's more to this?" Marcus sighed, gesturing for me to sit. "I didn't want to worry you until I was certain, but I've been investigating some irregularities that came up during our purchase." David opened a folder on the desk. "We discovered that someone attempted to file paperwork with the county recorder's office 2 days before your closing, claiming a verbal agreement of sale with Mrs. Whitmore." "Vanessa," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, her voice gentle but firm. "Using connections at her law firm to expedite the filing. Fortunately, it was flagged because I had already signed preliminary papers with you." "But that's fraud," David finished for me. "Or at least attempted fraud. She also approached the Historical Society with false concerns about your renovation plans, tried to convince the neighborhood association to block your permits, and contacted my nephew with incentives to contest the sale." Each revelation landed like a hammer blow. I struggled to reconcile this level of deception with the sister I'd grown up with. Vanessa had always been competitive, sometimes cruel, but this went beyond sibling rivalry into criminal territory. "We've been building a case," Marcus explained, taking my hand. "I hired private investigators after the nephew incident. They've documented everything. That's why I wasn't surprised by her announcement tonight. I've been waiting for her to make a public move that would expose her actions." "The countdown," I whispered, understanding dawning. He nodded. I knew Eleanor was arriving. The timing was perfect. "What happens now?" I asked, looking at David. "That depends on you and Marcus," the lawyer replied. "You have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges. At minimum, her law license could be suspended pending investigation." The thought of Vanessa facing professional ruin and possible legal consequences should have brought satisfaction after what she tried to do. Instead, I felt a profound sadness. "She's still my sister," I said quietly. Marcus squeezed my hand. "Which is why I think we should talk to her first, privately. Give her one chance to make this right before we take irreversible steps." His compassion in that moment, despite everything Vanessa had done to undermine us, reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him. Marcus had grown up with nothing and built his own success. He could have easily insisted on destroying someone who tried to take what he'd earned. Instead, he was considering my family ties. "Thank you," I whispered, leaning against his shoulder. Eleanor Whitmore nodded approvingly. "Mercy can be powerful when used wisely," she said. "But remember, it must be paired with boundaries." After they left, Marcus held me as I cried, for the beautiful evening ruined, for the sister I'd always hoped would someday accept me, for the family relationships that might never recover. "What made her hate me so much?" I asked through tears. "What did I ever do except exist in her shadow?" "Some people can't bear to see others happy," he said, stroking my hair. "Especially when they've convinced themselves they deserve that happiness more." We called Vanessa the next morning. To my surprise, she agreed to meet us at the house that afternoon. More surprising still, she came alone, without Bradley or the legal team she'd referenced in her announcement. She looked terrible, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, eyes swollen from crying, wearing jeans and a plain sweater instead of her usual perfectly coordinated outfit. As she stood on our doorstep, she seemed smaller somehow, her posture no longer quite so perfect. We sat in the sunroom, awkward silence stretching between us until Marcus spoke. "We know everything, Vanessa," he said without preamble. "The fraudulent filing, the interference with the Historical Society, bribing Whitmore's nephew. We have documentation of all of it." She didn't deny it. Instead, she stared at her hands folded in her lap. "Are you going to press charges?" "That depends on you," I said, finding my voice at last. "Why, Vanessa? Why would you do all this?" When she looked up, the naked pain in her eyes startled me. "Because you always get everything," she whispered. "Without even trying." "What are you talking about? You're the successful one. The perfect daughter with the perfect life." She laughed bitterly. "Perfect? My husband is cheating on me with his 25-year-old assistant. My law firm is investigating me for billing irregularities. I had to remortgage my house 6 months ago to cover investment losses. Meanwhile, you drop out of college, float through life without any real direction, and end up with a devoted husband and a mansion in Chestnut Hill." The revelation of her troubles left me speechless. Vanessa had always projected such confidence and success that I'd never questioned whether it was real. "I wanted this house," she continued, her voice breaking. "Not just because it's beautiful, but because Eleanor Whitmore is Philadelphia aristocracy. Being chosen by her would have validated me. When she rejected my offer and accepted yours instead, it was like confirmation that I would never be good enough, no matter how hard I worked." "So you tried to steal it," Marcus said, his tone neutral but his eyes hard. "I convinced myself I deserved it more," she admitted. "That I could make it right later, somehow. Things just escalated." "Do Mom and Dad know?" I asked, thinking of their hasty departure after Eleanor's intervention the night before. Vanessa nodded miserably. "Dad called this morning. He said not to expect them to defend me this time." The unspoken implication, that they had covered for her before, hung in the air between us. Marcus leaned forward, fixing Vanessa with a penetrating gaze I'd seen him use in business negotiations. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to issue a public apology to us and to Eleanor Whitmore. You'll resign from any neighborhood committees or historical societies where you've been spreading misinformation. You'll seek professional help for whatever drove you to these actions." "And if I do all that?" Vanessa asked, a flicker of her old defiance returning. "Then we don't pursue legal action," he said simply. "But understand this, we will have a restraining order drawn up and ready to file. One more incident, one more attempt to undermine us or this property, and we won't hesitate to use everything we have against you." "Those are Marcus's terms," I interjected, meeting my sister's gaze directly. "Mine are different." Both turned to look at me with surprise. "I want the truth about everything," I said firmly. "Not just about the house, but about our entire relationship. I want to understand why my own sister has been working against me my whole life, and I want a genuine effort to repair the damage, if that's even possible." Vanessa flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I don't know if I can give you what you're asking for." "Then we have nothing more to discuss," I replied, standing up. "David Moskowitz will be contacting your firm's ethics committee tomorrow morning." "Wait," she said, reaching out desperately. "Please. I'll try." What followed was 3 painful hours of conversation, the most honest we'd ever had. Vanessa revealed years of resentment stemming from our parents' complicated dynamics. While they had overtly favored her achievements, they had also, in private moments, compared her to me in ways that left lasting wounds. "Mom used to tell me, 'Why can't you be carefree like your sister?' Whenever I got stressed about school," Vanessa confessed. "And Dad would say, 'Amelia lights up a room just by being herself. You could learn from her.'" I had never known this. From my perspective, our parents had held me to impossible standards that Vanessa met effortlessly while I failed repeatedly. They pitted us against each other, I realized aloud. In different ways, but consistently. Marcus, who had been quietly listening, nodded. Classic family triangulation. Neither of you ever had the full picture of how the other was being treated. As painful as these revelations were, they created a foundation for understanding that had never existed between us before. By the time Vanessa left, red-eyed but standing straighter than when she'd arrived, we had agreed to professional family counseling and a structured plan for rebuilding trust. "I can't promise I'll never feel jealous again," she said at the door, her honesty surprisingly refreshing. "But I can promise I won't act on it like this. I'm sorry, Amelia. Truly." "I believe you," I said, and was surprised to find it was true. The aftermath of what became known in local circles as the Whitmore estate incident unfolded gradually. Vanessa kept her word, she issued apologies, stepped back from her community positions, and began therapy. My parents, confronted with their role in fostering our dysfunctional relationship, initially retreated in denial before reluctantly agreeing to join several family counseling sessions. Eleanor Whitmore became an unexpected ally and mentor to me. She began visiting regularly, sharing stories of the house's history and offering advice drawn from her 9 decades of life experience. During one such visit, about 3 months after the housewarming debacle, she brought a small wooden box. "I've been saving this for the right moment," she said, placing it in my hands. Inside is the original deed to this property, dated 1782, along with letters from each generation of my family to the next. "Now it's time for you to add to the collection." Opening the box revealed fragile parchment and yellowed envelopes, each addressed simply to the next steward. The responsibility implicit in this gift brought tears to my eyes. "I'm not sure I deserve this," I admitted. Eleanor patted my hand. "The house chose you as much as you chose it. That became clear to me the moment I saw how you looked at these rooms, not calculating their value or planning changes, but seeing their soul." She leaned closer, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "Besides, you handled that dreadful scene at your party with remarkable grace. Anyone who can maintain composure while their own sister tries to steal their home in front of 60 guests has the strength needed to protect this legacy." I laughed despite myself. "You make it sound almost normal." "My dear, I've been attending Philadelphia society functions for 70 years. I've seen fistfights at funerals, proposals at divorce proceedings, and at least 3 instances of someone bringing their mistress to their own anniversary party. Your sister's performance barely rates in the top 10 scandals I've witnessed." Her perspective helped me find humor in a situation that had felt devastating. It was the beginning of my healing. Marcus and I settled into our home and community through the changing seasons. By Christmas, we had established new traditions in the old house, a towering tree in the front hall, garlands on the staircases, and a holiday party much more successful than our housewarming had been. Vanessa attended with Bradley, both of them subdued but making visible efforts to be supportive. They brought a thoughtful housewarming gift, finally appropriate, 6 months later, of a commissioned painting of the property by a local artist. "I had her work from old photographs Eleanor provided," Vanessa explained awkwardly as I unwrapped it. "It shows the house through different eras, all layered together." The piece was genuinely beautiful, capturing the soul of our home in a way that acknowledged its history and our place within it. The gesture represented something significant, Vanessa seeing the house not as something taken from her, but as something meaningful to me. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "It's perfect for the library." Our relationship remained complicated, fraught with triggers and old wounds that would take years to fully address. But in that moment, exchanging a genuine smile with my sister in the home she had once tried to claim, I felt the first real hope that we might eventually find our way to something resembling sisterhood. Later that night, after the guests had gone and we were alone by the fire in the master bedroom, Marcus pulled me close. "Happy?" he asked, his voice rumbling against my ear where my head rested on his chest. I thought about the question seriously before answering. The past year had contained some of the highest highs and lowest lows of my life, finding our dream home, the public humiliation at our party, the painful family reckonings that followed, and now this tentative peace. "Yes," I decided finally. "Not perfectly happy, but authentically happy. This feels real in a way that perfect would not." Marcus kissed the top of my head. "Real is better than perfect. Real lasts." As I drifted toward sleep in the home that had weathered over 2 centuries of family dramas before witnessing ours, I thought about Eleanor's words the day we closed. "This house has sheltered 6 generations of my family through wars, depressions, and personal tragedies. Its walls hold secrets and strength. It will protect you too, if you honor it." Perhaps the protection hadn't come in the form I would have expected, preventing conflict or ensuring smooth sailing. Instead, this house had created the crucible necessary for long overdue truths to emerge. In exposing the fault lines in my family, it had also created space for genuine repair. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting the estate in pristine white that would cover all evidence of the year's turmoil by morning. Inside, I slept soundly for the first time in months, finally at home in every sense of the word. In the spring, As the garden Eleanor had so lovingly tended began to bloom under my novice care, I found myself spending more time in the art studio Marcus had created for me. Years had passed since I'd painted seriously, a passion Vanessa had once mockingly called my hobby phase, and my parents had indulged with thinly veiled disappointment. But something about this house, with its perfect light and generations of stories soaked into the walls, awakened the dormant artist in me. I started with small watercolors of the garden, then graduated to larger canvases capturing the changing moods of the house itself. Marcus would find me there at hours, lost in concentration, paint spattered and more content than he'd seen me in years. "You found your medium," he observed one evening, bringing me tea and standing behind me to study the canvas where I was capturing the library's intricate moldings bathed in sunset light. "The house speaks to me," I admitted, feeling slightly foolish saying it aloud. "It's like it wants its story told." Instead of the skeptical reaction I half expected, Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Eleanor said something similar when we first met her. That this place chooses its owners as much as they choose it. Do you believe that?" He considered the question seriously. "I believe in connections, between people and places. Sometimes those connections defy logical explanation." Coming from Marcus, who approached most of life with data-driven precision, this philosophical turn surprised me. "Is that why you wanted this house so badly? You felt a connection?" "Partly," he acknowledged. "But mostly I wanted it because your eyes lit up the moment we walked through the door. You belonged here immediately." The simple truth of his statement, his motivation centered on my happiness rather than status or investment value, contrasted sharply with Vanessa's desperate grasping for validation through possession. The difference crystallized something I'd been struggling to articulate in therapy. "I think I've been defining success by Vanessa's metrics my entire life," I said slowly. "Always feeling like I was failing because I wasn't achieving the things she valued. And now?" I gestured to the canvas, the paint-splattered smock, the studio filled with my evolving work. "Now I'm finding my own measurements." The following week, I received an unexpected call from Bradley. We'd never been close, he'd always treated me with a vague politeness one might show a distant in-law, so his request to meet for coffee caught me off guard. We arranged to meet at a small cafe in Rittenhouse Square, neutral territory away from Chestnut Hill. When I arrived, Bradley was already seated, looking uncharacteristically disheveled in jeans and an untucked button-down rather than his usual tailored suit. "Thanks for coming," he said, rising briefly to greet me. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted, sliding into the chair across from him. "What's this about, Bradley?" He stared into his coffee for a long moment. "Vanessa doesn't know I'm meeting you." The statement sent a chill of apprehension through me. "If this is about the house—" "It's not," he interrupted quickly. "Well, not directly. It's about Vanessa. About what happened. I think I owe you an explanation." Over the next hour, Bradley shared a perspective on my sister I'd never fully understood. He spoke of the crushing pressure she placed on herself, the panic attacks she hid from everyone, the perfectionism that drove her to increasingly desperate measures to maintain appearances. When Eleanor Whitmore rejected her offer on the house, something broke in Vanessa, he explained. It wasn't just about wanting the property, it was what it represented. Validation from old Philadelphia society that she was finally good enough. "I had no idea," I said, thinking of my poised, confident sister who never seemed to doubt herself. "She always made it look so easy." Bradley laughed bitterly. "Nothing has ever been easy for Vanessa. Every achievement came through relentless work and sacrifice. When things came easily to you, making friends, charming people, finding Marcus, it reinforced her belief that she had to work harder because she lacked some fundamental quality you possessed naturally. The revelation shifted my understanding of our entire relationship. While I'd been envying Vanessa's achievements and apparent confidence, she'd been envying my natural ease with people and what she perceived as effortless good fortune. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Bradley hesitated. "Because she's trying. Really trying in therapy. And I'm worried that without some understanding from your side, it won't be enough to repair what's broken between you." "You really love her," I realized, seeing past his usual reserved exterior to the concern beneath. "Since college," he confirmed. "Through everything, the good and bad. She's more than the person you saw at your housewarming." That was Vanessa at her worst, not her whole. As I drove home from our meeting, I found myself reflecting on the sister I thought I knew versus the woman Bradley had described. The integration of these contradictory perspectives would take time, but for the first time, I felt genuine empathy rather than just hurt or anger. When I told Marcus about the conversation that evening, he wasn't entirely surprised. People rarely show their full selves to family, he observed. Sometimes it's the people closest to us who see the least accurate version. I've been thinking about reaching out to her, I admitted. Not just waiting for the structured family therapy sessions, but something more casual. Sister to sister. Marcus's approval was immediate and encouraging. What did you have in mind? The idea had been forming since my drive home from meeting Bradley. I want to invite her to see my studio. Show her what I'm working on. It's the most honest part of myself right now. 2 days later, Vanessa stood awkwardly in the doorway of my studio, taking in the canvases propped against walls and the works in progress on easels. She looked different somehow, still elegantly dressed, but with subtle changes. Her hair fell in looser waves than her usual structured style, and she wore less makeup, revealing freckles I'd forgotten she had. These are remarkable, she said finally, moving closer to examine a large painting of the house at dawn. I had no idea you were still painting. I wasn't, for years, I replied honestly. The house inspired me to start again. Vanessa's fingers hovered near the canvas without touching, tracing the brushstrokes in the air. You've captured something essential about it. The way the morning light hits the east wing. It's exactly right. The genuine appreciation in her voice loosened something tight in my chest. Would you like some tea? We could sit in the garden. The afternoon unfolded with unexpected ease. We didn't discuss the housewarming disaster directly, nor did we delve into childhood grievances. Instead, we talked about neutral topics, her work on a pro bono case she was passionate about, my rediscovery of painting, a novel we'd both recently read. As she was leaving, Vanessa paused by a small watercolor study of the guest house. I've been seeing someone, she said abruptly. A therapist, I mean. It's been illuminating. Bradley mentioned you were getting help, I acknowledged carefully. He did? Her surprise was evident. When did you speak with Bradley? I explained our coffee meeting, watching her expression cycle through shock, indignation, and finally reluctant understanding. He shouldn't have gone behind my back, she said, though without real heat. But his heart was in the right place, I suppose. He loves you, I said simply. That was clear. Something vulnerable flickered across her face. I haven't made it easy lately. She touched the watercolor lightly. This one. Would you consider selling it to me? The request caught me off guard. You want to buy one of my paintings? It reminds me of the playhouse we had as children, she explained. Remember? Dad built it with that same roof line. The memory surfaced slowly, a rare happy one from our childhood. Dad had spent one summer building an elaborate playhouse behind our suburban Philadelphia home when I was 7 and Vanessa was 9. Unlike most of our childhood spaces, which became battlegrounds for competition, the playhouse had somehow remained neutral territory where we cooperated instead of competed. I'm not selling them, I said, then added as her face fell, but if you'd like that one as a gift, it's yours. The exchange marked a subtle shift in our relationship, not forgiveness or full reconciliation, but an opening. A possibility. By summer, 3 months after our initial reconciliation attempt, these small interactions had accumulated into something resembling a cautious friendship. We met occasionally for coffee or a walk, carefully avoiding the most triggering topics while gradually rebuilding basic trust. Then came the setback that threatened our fragile progress. At a charity gala in July, I overheard 2 women from Vanessa's social circle discussing the Whitmore estate scandal in vivid, embellished detail. When they noticed me nearby, their expressions of mortified recognition confirmed they knew exactly who I was. The incident left me shaken, wondering how many others were still gossiping about our family drama and what role Vanessa might have in perpetuating the story. The old suspicion that I couldn't truly trust her resurfaced with crushing intensity. When Marcus found me in tears that night, I poured out my doubts and fears. What if this whole reconciliation is just another angle? What if she's laughing about me with her friends, playing the victim while painting me as the villain? Instead of dismissing my concerns, Marcus took them seriously. What would convince you one way or the other? The question gave me pause. I don't know. Trust isn't something I can just decide to feel again. No, he agreed. It has to be earned. But you also have to be willing to see the evidence when it's presented. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from Eleanor's nurse. Mrs. Reeves, she said, addressing me by my married name. Eleanor asked me to pass along a message. She thinks you should know that your sister visited yesterday and spoke at length about the progress in your relationship. Eleanor said, and I'm quoting directly, "Genuine remorse has a different quality than calculated regret. I believe your sister is experiencing the former." The message from Eleanor, who had become something of a moral compass for me, carried significant weight. Still, doubts lingered until the following week, when I ran into one of the gossiping women from the gala at a boutique in town. She approached me with visible discomfort. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble, "for discussing your family situation at the gala. It was inappropriate and unkind." Surprised by the direct acknowledgement, I struggled to respond. "Thank you for saying that. I should also tell you," she continued, "that Vanessa called me personally to express her disappointment in my behavior. She made it very clear that anyone who continued to spread stories about your family would no longer be welcome in her social or professional circles." The revelation that Vanessa had actively defended me and our family's privacy, potentially at cost to her own social standing, did more to restore my faith in our healing process than months of careful conversations had accomplished. When I shared this development with Marcus, his smile held a hint of vindication. "People can surprise you," he said. "Sometimes even in good ways." By late summer, our relationship had strengthened enough that when Vanessa tentatively suggested bringing our parents into the fragile new dynamic for an informal family dinner, I agreed. The evening wasn't without tension. Years of established patterns couldn't be undone in months, but it marked the first time in my adult life that I left a family gathering feeling energized rather than depleted. 6 months later, on the anniversary of moving into our home, Marcus and I hosted a small dinner party, just Eleanor Whitmore, my parents, Vanessa and Bradley, and a few close friends. The evening unfolded with a warmth and ease that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. After dinner, Eleanor raised her glass in a toast. "To walls that hold secrets, floors that bear witness, and a home that transforms its inhabitants as much as they transform it." As glasses clinked around the table, I caught Vanessa's eye. Something passed between us, not forgiveness exactly, which was still a work in progress, but recognition. We had both been changed by the events surrounding this house. Painfully, yes, but perhaps necessarily. Later, as Marcus and I stood on the terrace watching the last guests depart, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The path hadn't been straight or easy. The destination wasn't what I had envisioned when we first saw the property. But standing in the gentle summer evening, my husband's arm around my waist and peace finally finding root in my heart, I knew we were exactly where we belonged. The house had indeed protected us, not by shielding us from conflict but by creating space for truth to emerge, messy, uncomfortable, essential truth. In doing so, it had given us something far more valuable than the perfect facade of harmony my family had maintained for decades. It had given us a chance at something real. In the distance, the lights of my sister's car disappeared down the driveway. For the first time since childhood, I found myself looking forward to seeing her again rather than dreading our next encounter. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. Marcus seemed to read my thoughts. "Family is complicated," he said, squeezing my hand. "But worth the work." "Yes," I agreed, leaning into his solid presence beside me. "Especially when you get to choose your home." Above us, stars emerged in the darkening sky, witnesses to another chapter in the long story of the house that had survived so much and would, I hoped, shelter many more generations through their own wars, depressions, and personal tragedies. This time, though, I intended to write a happier chapter than the ones that had come before.